would you think that perhaps one of the most powerful drives in all living creatures is what we call the survival instinct? This drive to live, to be. Isn't that rather universal in all living creatures, including us? Well, in humanity, I think that that shows up in another way, besides just physical survival. I think it comes out as a kind of desire for happiness. We want to be happy. We seek happiness. All people do, however they do it, in all these different ways, mostly leading to unhappiness, but we seek it, don't we? We try to find it. And that's a kind of desire, a kind of thrust, a kind of effort for self-fulfillment, I think. Now, although everyone feels happy sometimes, and everyone feels sad sometimes in life, and some people have a relatively happy life and some people a relatively unhappy one, as we've heard frequently and know from our experience, it does not last. Now, to get some understanding, or at least some view of how this might be and why this might be, I think we need to start at the very beginning of what the Theosophical philosophy teaches. And we will only briefly mention it, because we're going to deal with something other than this very first beginning, if we can say there is such a thing as a beginning. Before anything is, according to the Theosophical doctrine, teaching, not dogma, teaching, there is, if I may put it this way, eternal, boundless, immutable, unthinkable space. That which is, whether or not there is anything to be perceived within it. Now, it is said in the secret doctrine and in the teachings of Theosophy that when a universe is to come into being, a polarization takes place in that space. So you get on the one hand the subjective side of reality, or consciousness, or spirit, and the other side substance or matter. And that the tension between these two produces the visible universe. That's all we're going to say about it at this point. That's a theoretical situation for us, but I think there's evidence that it may well be just like that. Now, put in a kind of a scientific way, you know, I'm sure many of you, that Einstein spoke of the field and substance or matter. And he said at one point that matter is those places in the field which have become extremely intense, and that there is no place in the new physics for both matter and the field, for the field is the only reality. And fields, according to every physicist, whatever their philosophy, are non-material. What could be more theosophical? That the non-material has, may I put it this way, congealed into substance. So we can use the metaphor of the sea, that the sea becomes the icebergs, but the icebergs are the sea. Now, this polarization, theoretically for us, and this bringing into existence of the existent world, causes contrast, doesn't it? If there's only space, there isn't anything to say, to see, to comment upon. It's all unspeakable. But once something appears, now there's contrast. HPB suggests that by that act, by that event, the eternal has limited itself. And she writes, ancient wisdom attributes the birth of cosmos and the evolution of life to the breaking asunder of primordial manifested unity into plurality, or the great illusion of form. Homogeneity, having transformed itself into heterogeneity, Contrasts have naturally been created. Now this, in mystical Christian terms, is the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, dying in very truth that we might live. Without that eternal sacrifice, without that sacrifice of the eternal unity into the plurality, we would not exist. So the metaphorical death of the eternal, it can't die, of course, but the metaphorical death of the eternal, bringing into existence the plurality, that sacrifice was required for us to live. Hence, from the very beginning, this sacrifice, this differentiation, has created polarity. It has created the polar opposites of space and substance, of inner life and outer form, positive, negative, and all other polarities that derive from that initial polarization of the one. Now, this polarity principle is illustrated in the myth of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Paradise are together, are they not? Everything's blissful when they're together. But as soon as Eve walks away from Adam, there's polarity. And what does she do? She eats of the tree of knowledge, doesn't she? Now, Eve represents matter from this particular esoteric point of view of the myth. And why should matter be the one that eats of the tree of knowledge? Because, you see, consciousness, there's nothing to be conscious of until there is something, is there? So, were there no matter, were there no substance, there would be eternal beingness or eternal unconsciousness. Only when there's substance does consciousness spark to life. There's something to be aware of, you see? So Eve represents matter, and it is she, co-eternal with spirit, according to the Theosophical doctrine, neither inferior nor superior to the other, but co-eternal. It is matter that brings consciousness to life. And therefore she is our heavenly mother. This idea that it was Eve who broke asunder the primordial unity by eating of the tree of knowledge, it gave the idea that matter was somehow evil, didn't it? I mean, that is a sort of an underlying idea in some religions, isn't it? Some of the Gnostics had that idea. I think the Albigensians also had, some of them anyway, had that idea that the world of the flesh was the world of Satan, you see, and the spiritual world was the real world and the one to be looked to. And the spiritual Franciscans in the Middle Ages went a little too far for the Holy Father in Rome. And they called the Roman Church the Ecclesia Carnalis, the church of the flesh, and themselves the Ecclesia Spiritualis, the church of the spirit. That didn't sit too well with the Holy Father, so he had him burned at the stake. So this idea that the feminine started it all off by getting knowledge and breaking up the unity, you see, gave rise to this nonsense that women, and it doesn't mean women, it means matter, are the cause of evil. That's an idea that ran through Western culture, and I suppose a little bit still does, but I don't think so much today. I don't say there's equality yet among men and women, but we're getting there. But I think that idea that women are the cause of evil is not so strong in our culture anymore, is it? But yeah, that's where it came from, I think. So you see, in order to know anything, there must be contrast. There's nothing to know if there's no contrast, right? So in order to know, this polarity is essential. And it gives rise to all the different polarities, including the one that disturbs we human beings most of all, good and evil. Now, in chronological letter number 88 of the Mahatma letters, 10 in the earlier editions, K.H. writes this about the question of evil. Evil has no existence per se, that is, in and of itself, and is but the absence of good, and exists but for him who is made its victim. It proceeds from two causes, and no more than good is it an independent cause in nature. Nature is destitute of goodness or malice. She follows only immutable laws. She does what is. And as the Judeo-Christian scriptures say, God is no respecter of persons. The child who falls from the cliff and dies is not saved by gravity suspending its laws, nor is the criminal who falls spared either. And as the scripture says, God makes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust, totally impersonal. So the adept writes that there isn't any such thing as a power, like electricity, that we can call evil. It does not exist. Now, he's not foolish, as you, I hope, know. He's not denying what we perceive as evil. He knows it quite well and understands, he says, its origin. He goes on to say the real evil proceeds, now he's talking about what I understand to be human evil. The real evil proceeds from human intelligence, and its origin rests entirely with reasoning man who dissociates himself from nature. Humanity then alone is the source of evil. Evil is the exaggeration of good, the progeny of human selfishness and greediness. Think profoundly, and you will find that the origin of every evil, whether small or great, is in human action. Therefore, it is neither nature nor an imaginary deity that has to be blamed, but human nature made vile by selfishness. Now, he goes on to point out that religion is a great cause of evil. He says 2/3. Mind you, he didn't measure exactly. And he says this, ignorance created gods, and cunning took advantage. You see its selfishness again? Cunning took advantage of the opportunity. It is religion that makes of the human being the selfish bigot and the fanatic that hates all mankind out of his own sect without rendering him any better or more moral for it. Is not man ever ready to commit any kind of evil if told that his God or gods demand the crime? I need not call to your attention the world today. So what we call human evil, according to Siddhartha Gautama, and the adepts repeat this in their letters, it really begins with ignorance of who or what we truly are. The consciousness tends to identify with the form. So the form which it takes, the consciousness tends to say, this is I. Oh, it doesn't say it in the plant or the animal or even in most human beings in their head, but that's what we feel, isn't it? This is I. We say all these lovely things about I am Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, and I am the spiritual self and the higher nature, and I live on forever. And then we have a life-threatening disease, and we're not the spiritual self anymore. We're this, aren't we? Mostly. Not all of us. So consciousness tends to identify with form, experience the sense of this is I, at least in the human being, and therefore this self-preservation instinct takes over, and selfishness is the inevitable consequence, isn't it? Preserve me. So we act out of what we think we are, and nature's principles act impersonally, impartially, and bit by bit we learn that We are ignorant that we are not what we thought we were. Now, why polarity? Why universe at all? Well, no one can answer that. The amusing thing once that HPB allegedly said when she was asked, what is Parabrahm, which is the Indian equivalent of the first fundamental proposition, the eternal, beyond the known, beyond the existent universe. What is the ultimate reality? The question was asked. So they asked HPB, what is, why did this universe come into existence? She said, don't ask me, ask Parabrahm. We don't know, do we? Why? All we can say is, from our limited human perspective, it seems to be the nature of reality to congeal into substance and melt into the eternal. Again and again and again. That there seems to be, from our perspective at least, no beginning and no end to this process because it's how things are. It's the nature of reality itself. Now, having said that we can't answer the ultimate questions, and there are many who can, by the way, and charge a great deal of money for the answer, we can at least see that what we call evil may have its uses. Mrs. Besant writes, for their development, it is necessary for positive qualities to be exercised against opposition. Without opposition, no development is possible. Without opposition, no growth is possible. All growth and development result from the exercise of energy against something which opposes. Now, even St. Augustine knew this, it seems to me. And he says this, do not think that the evil are in the world for no purpose, and that God makes no use of them. Every wicked person lives either that he may be corrected, or that through him the righteous may be tried and tested. And then he goes on to show that he recognizes a unity in the human race. Would that those who now test us were converted and tried with us. Yet though they continue to try us, let us not hate them. For we do not know whether any of them will persist to the end in their evil ways. And most of the time, when you think you are hating your enemy, you are hating your brother without knowing it. Isn't that beautiful? Now let's just review briefly and come back to this central drive of self-fulfillment or survival instinct that comes out, I think, as self-fulfillment and happiness in humans very often. In our long evolutionary journey, it's that inner human potential is being developed, I think. The driving force of the self-preservation, the longing for happiness, the inner urge for self-fulfillment forces us to act. That's the driving force. We act. Karma is not all bad. No karma, no action. Karma being desire for the newer members who don't know the term, or craving. No desire, no action. So it teaches us. So that drives us into action, identified with the form that we have or are in the exterior sense. We act out of ignorance, and selfishness results, and I think is an absolute necessity in the beginning of our evolution. Then nature's impersonal principles teach us, because the consequences of our actions come back to haunt us or to give us pleasure. And bit by bit, through the many incarnations, or even through one lifetime, should one not accept reincarnation, we begin to see how things really are. And the veil of ignorance is gradually, ever so gradually, because evolution does not move quickly, gradually torn away, and we perceive that we are in the world, but not of it. We discover that we are the other, the still point between good and evil. HPB refers to this in The Voice of the Silence. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up self to non-self, being to non-being, and then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. Aye, sweet is rest between the wings of that which is not born, nor dies, but is the Om throughout eternal ages. Now, in his Leaves of Grass, Walt Whitman speaks of that experience beyond the opposites, the point, still point, between good and evil, the place between the wings of the great bird, which is ever still while the wings flap. He writes, "Trippers and askers surround me, people I meet, the effect upon me of my early life, of the ward and city I live in, of the nation, the latest news, discoveries, inventions, societies, authors old and new. My dinner, dress, associates, looks, business, compliments, dues, the real or fancied indifference of some man or woman I love, or loss or lack of money, or depressions, or exaltations, they come to me days and nights and go from me again. But they are not the me, myself. Apart from the pulling and the hauling stands what I am. Stands amused, complacent, compassionating, idle, unitary, looks down, is erect, bends an arm on an impalpable certain rest, looks with its side-curved head, curious, what will come next? Both in and out of the game. I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. And then he describes the effect in his being of this realization of this self, this still point which we are. And those who meditate will know this for themselves. Swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and joy and knowledge that pass all the art and argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the elder hand of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the eldest brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers, and that a kelson of the creation is love. Polarity is an absolutely universal law. Without it, there would be no universe. We would not exist. With it, we struggle. Trapped in the illusion of form, produced by polarity, driven by self-preservation, the pursuit of happiness, the self-fulfillment urge, we act out of ignorance and selfishness. Then at last, by the constant lawful consequences of our actions, we realize, again from St. Augustine, our hearts are ever restless till they find their rest in Thee, the eternal. Now, eventually it is said, according to the Theosophical philosophy and teachings, that all come to that still point beyond good and evil. We are all going to the same place, wherever we are on the path. But we can shorten it, according to those who have gone before us. by study, by meditation, by service. Everyone pointing away from this identification with the personal, limited, transient self that we think we are. Clearly, service takes us away from thinking of me, unless we're doing it for my glorification, when it isn't true service then. Study clearly does as well. But meditation, I think all are necessary. But I truly believe myself, and I speak out of experience, meditation is, I think, absolutely essential to experience and to be that still point. Rather than to just understand the principles, which is absolutely critical, absolutely necessary. But it is through meditation that we can become it, realize it, not become it, we are it, realize it within ourselves. H.P. Blavatsky did not write very much about meditation. But in the collected writings, she, or possibly someone else, but we think it is she, wrote this. And to me, it is extraordinarily important. Whatever we do in meditation, this to me is critical to this experiencing, being that stillness within. In his hours of silent meditation, the student will find that there is one space of silence within him where he can find refuge from thoughts and desires, from the turmoil of the senses and the delusions of the mind. By sinking his consciousness deep into his heart, he can reach this place. At first, only when he is alone and in silence and darkness. But when the need for the silence has grown great enough, he will turn to it, turn to seek it, even in the midst of the struggle with self, and he will find it. Only he must not let go of his outer self or his body. He must learn to retire into this citadel when the battle grows fierce. But to do so without losing sight of the battle. Without allowing himself to fancy that by so doing he has won the victory. That victory is won only when all is silence without, as within the inner citadel. Fighting thus from within that silence, the student will find he has solved the first great paradox. The victory is not won when we experience that inner self. The battle is just beginning. But once seen, once known, never forgotten, and every one of us can do it because we are human.